Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, present here with us at DIP Center. Good afternoon to all those of you who are following us on your various platforms at home and abroad. Today, I must begin by apologizing for running a bit late. We should have been here at 2:30, but Cabinet was on the way, so I'm running a few minutes late, so I hope that you can excuse me for that. I asked for this press conference today because I want to deal with one subject matter which is sufficiently important to take up all of the time which is allocated. And that matter has to do with the whole question of our handling of the migrant situation and our relationship with the OAS and CARICOM. Those are the issues I wish to deal with today, and I will not be dealing with any other issue outside of that range. And I would be back with you in a few days' time for one of the normal comprehensive press conferences which would deal with the COVID management and any other matter which may become itinerant. I would like to begin against the background of a comment made by me about our situation vis-a-vis what is expected of us by some in managing our sovereignty and our relationship with illegal migrants and others coming from South America in particular. And the response to that comment has been from the other part of the government in Trinidad and Tobago, the opposition, is that I am requiring or I am needing mental attention because I am mentally unstable to have taken the positions I have taken. And I've also seen members of the media taking issue with the fact that I have used certain nouns to describe certain people. Some people even think it's an adjective, but certain nouns to describe certain people. And I have been accused of attacking the OAS. Today I want to speak not just to the Trinidad and Tobago elite. I want to speak to the average citizen of Trinidad and Tobago so that they can understand what our circumstances are and how their business is being attended to. I want to begin by playing an answer I gave to the press at Piarco Airport in May 2017 when I came from a visit to Chile, where the issue of Venezuela would have come up in my discussion with President Bachelet. And we had just had issue at CARICOM, and the Americans had just upped the ante on Venezuela with respect to regime change. Could you play that, please, and I ask you to pay attention to it for a minute or two?
Trinidad and Tobago's position vis-a-vis Venezuela in the OAS, and did the issue of Venezuela and the turmoil that's going on there come up during your discussions in Chile?
Yes, it came up, and it came up very frontally and very forcefully. And Trinidad and Tobago, I had in the bilateral discussion I had with President Bachelet, that matter came up and we discussed it at length. Suffice it to say that Trinidad and Tobago's position is that we do not interfere in the affairs of neighboring countries, and we will not be encouraged to do so now. Our foreign policy, as directed to our ambassadors abroad, those who speak for us abroad, is that we do not interfere. Now, the interpretation of the word interfere is as you would make it. However, we are very concerned about the situation in Venezuela And it's our interpretation that the parties should do what has to be done for the interest of the people of Venezuela, because the management of Venezuela is a matter for the people of Venezuela. If I may indicate to you one item that came up in this discussion with President Bashley in our private discussion, in the one-on-one discussion, is that Trinidad and Tobago registered its strong objection to the behavior of the OAS leadership, where public servants from the OAS took it upon themselves to engage the government of Venezuela, the president in fact, in a very derogatory manner. And it is our view that in so doing, that the head of the OAS, who is a public servant and whose job specification specifically requires him or her to function not for any country in the OAS, but for the OAS, independently of every other country in the OAS. And when the head of the OAS behaves in the way that the current president has behaved, in taking on the government of Venezuela in the way it is done, it is Trinidad and Tobago's position that the OAS has been compromised in this matter and now cannot play any significant role in treating with Venezuela's difficulty. And whereas against our policy of not interfering in the business of our neighbors, we were 100% sure that we could have played a role in an OAS initiative if such an initiative was available. But because of the behavior of the OAS leadership, the OAS has now removed itself from any meaningful participation and in fact has deteriorated now into partisan attacks, and it is threatening to have the same effect on CARICOM. I don't know if you're aware that some members of CARICOM are very aggressive along certain lines and others are not. And if we're not careful, CARICOM too could destroy itself as an honest broker with respect to any involvement in assistance to Venezuela and their internal problems. And Trinidad and Tobago made its position clear to Chile as a leader in South America that it is our view as a long-standing member of the OAS that the leadership of the OAS at this point in time needs to change so that the OAS can come back to having the potential of being an honest broker, to intervene and to provide a pathway for peace and progress in situations as they exist in Venezuela now. So that's the position of us.
We have stating from boards at the OAS. I think there was one today.
Yes, we are not supporting initiatives that are not, in our view, helpful in treating with the difficulties in front of us.
Do you know if there's a unanimous position at CARICOM or within CARICOM on that issue?
There is no unanimous position in CARICOM on the issue. As a matter of fact, if CARICOM wants to be taken seriously and to speak with a louder voice, matters of this nature should be CARICOM initiatives rather than individual countries going off and taking individual positions, sometimes influenced by interests that may not serve our interests.
That was May 2017. And the reason why I played that is just to remind you that any position of Trinidad and Tobago and the OAS today is not a position of recent vintage. May I remind you that to date, there were some developments before that caution that I raised there. There were a number of views in the international diplomacy in the region in particular, which were very supportive of that position, that the OAS public servants had in fact prejudiced the organization's position. And if it had continued like that, it wouldn't do us well. The end result of that was that that battle between the public servants at the OAS and Venezuela resulted in the government of Venezuela withdrawing from the OAS because Venezuela did not believe that it was being treated with respect and fairness. The major step is that Venezuela left the OAS, as I had cautioned there that could happen, which meant that the OAS could not do what we in Trinidad and Tobago anticipated it would do. If you may recall, at some time later, I made my first visit to the United Nations, and I gave a speech at the United Nations. And the genesis of the main tenet of that speech was outlining Trinidad and Tobago's position with respect to international diplomacy of this nature. And it is that we do not support unilateralism. We do not support might is right. We do not support power to who pays. We support multilateralism, meaning that the Charter of the United Nations that accept all nations with equality, large or small, and that the United Nations Charter applies equally to all countries, large or small. Multilateralism, as against one country taking a decision against another country in whatever agenda they may have. That's our position at the UN that came up after that. Lo and behold, you would have heard me mention about CARICOM and the way CARICOM was going about it. CARICOM eventually took a unanimous position on the Venezuela situation, along with Uruguay, Mexico, and other countries of the region. So when you hear them talking about Trinidad and Tobago and the OAS, we're not alone in this. There are other countries that support our position, even when we are leading it. Because Trinidad and Tobago was the first country to call for the resignation of the head of the OAS for what I described there. Instead of that happening, somehow by other initiatives, who has more corn, feed more fowl, and Almagro's contract was renewed 1 year ahead of schedule. A year before the contract expired, machinations took place. And in the face of a call from some of the countries for his removal, for his behavior, and for the problem it was causing in Venezuela, the main problem being that the Venezuelan issue could not be dealt with in the OAS. Got his contract renewed, so he's now on a new contract, a year before his contract expired. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago, having not gone down a certain road that you were encouraged to go, they made an enemy of us. We stood in our position. The end result is that the Venezuelan matter has never come to the OAS as properly constituted. But two things happened subsequently. One is that a new president of Venezuela was identified and appointed from a capital somewhere else. And that new president got the support of the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere in the world. Notwithstanding the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago taking that position as the country's position, it is common knowledge that the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago decided to support President Guido as the president of Venezuela. So clearly, our foreign policy was to be undermined from home, and I'll come back to that. So we go to the OAS meetings, as we have, our rep goes there, our ambassador in New York, Washington, sorry. And at the OAS meeting is seated a representative of Venezuela placed there by other countries, while Venezuela has withdrawn from the OAS. Trinidad and Tobago's position on that is very clear, that the OAS body is not properly constituted by simply placing a person there at somebody else's behest and put resolutions there and ask us to vote on it. our position has consistently been that we are not voting for any resolution where the Venezuelan representative is not properly seated. Because to have Venezuela represented at the OAS while the country has withdrawn, I need not tell you what that is. So we have not been voting for any of those resolutions on the principle that Venezuela is not in the OAS. But the resolutions would be passed and people play their politics with it and so on. And of course, we come to the situation where we got to the point eventually where there was to be regime change in Venezuela by military means. And that is where Trinidad and Tobago, if we had to stand alone, but we didn't, but if we had to stand alone, we must, because that kind of development in Venezuela would have had serious physical consequences for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, largely with respect to the migration of persons who would have been further affected, much more than they were being affected before, and many of whom would find their way into Trinidad and Tobago, and we would have been in great difficulty. For 300 years, our border has been open with Venezuela, and it remains so until a decision had to be taken with respect to how many more can we handle in our society without it becoming overpowering for us. And the government acted, and I'll come to that. I draw your attention to this document because, you see, I don't know who does the research or who reads or who follows, but I do know who didn't read this document. And I have not seen any reference to this document anywhere in the local media. I've seen lots of references parroting what the opposition uninformed say, that we have no policy and we are acting vacuum and we didn't do this and we didn't do that. And I must admit that sometimes I get angry, but I usually control my anger. But sometimes I do get angry. This document is called Invisible Migrants, and it was done by the ACP, African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. This documents a profile of irregular migration, smuggling of migrants, and trafficking in persons in Trinidad and Tobago. 12 countries in 2010 were identified as pilot situations requiring study, paid for by international agencies, financial support of Switzerland, the IOM, and UNFPA handled it. And it is a document. The 12 countries were Angola, Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Haiti, Kenya, Lesotho, Nigeria, Papua New Guinea, Senegal, East Timor, Trinidad and Tobago, and Tanzania. These were the 12 countries that had this kind of problem, that the ACP, African, Caribbean, Pacific grouping of countries, decided to have a study done. And I will make some mention as to what it said. And they gave us here in Trinidad and Tobago a consultant, an expert called Leanne Waldrop-Bonnier. And this document is on the appropriate website. It's on the website, not even just in the Ministry of National Security. It's on our website. The consultant worked, and in the foreword, let me just tell you, a foreword signed by the Director of International Affairs in the Ministry of National Security of Trinidad and Tobago. It says, Trinidad and Tobago is widely viewed as a destination for both regional and extra-regional migrants as a result of its development, employment, and integration opportunities. So while many people here, I shouldn't say many, while some people here think like Trinidad and Tobago is not a real place, it says Trinidad and Tobago is widely viewed as a destination where its development, employment, and integration opportunities is attractive to people. And flowing from that, you will get trafficked persons and smuggled migrants. And of course, that made us one of the pilot nations. And it went on, document, it's 160 odd pages, I think. but it has 127 pages, I think that's it. It made recommendations on short-term and long-term policies on irregular migration, and it made recommendations on strategies to address inter alia, undocumented migrants, deportees, refugees, and victims of trafficking. This was initiated in 2010. The report is dated 2013. So by 2013, this document existed for the guidance of Trinidad and Tobago arising out of this ACP study. The study talks about key recommendations, but in the abstract, it says this. The overarching objective of this study was to facilitate the creation of evidence-based policies capable of maximizing the potential contribution of migration to the development of Trinidad and Tobago. Moreover, it sought to improve the programmatic and policy framework on cross-border migration with a focus on irregular migration, trafficking in persons, and smuggling of migrants. I go to the recommendations. This is 2013. There are a number of recommendations, but I'll just spot one or two so that you could see what I'm talking about. The first recommendation is what you will see would have been happening in Trinidad under this government. A renewed commitment to the enforcement of the Immigration Act and its associated laws is needed, and efforts should be made to address inconsistencies and deficiencies. That is what you would have seen guiding this government. Before this government, you would have seen Venezuelans coming and going at will, and there was no government response. Under our system, for a while, we watched it, and eventually it came to a point where this government acted. The second recommendation talks about stiffer penalties being imposed on employers for breach of these laws. We haven't got to that yet, but we're getting there. And of course, workplaces should be vigilantly regulated and monitored by the government to guard against the exploitation of workers, regardless of status, and prosecute abusive employers. We're going to get there. But this is 2013. You would have heard in recent times, from the parliament in particular, leading the country down this road, that we must observe international law. Even in the court you hear it arguing. The international treaty say that this must happen and that must happen. This very comprehensive and excellent piece of work from the ACP in Trinidad and Tobago at item 10 recommendation. This is a recommendation. Trinidad and Tobago should consider signing on to the International Convention for the Protection of All Migrant Workers and members of their families to reaffirm its commitment and conformity to universal legal and ethical norms. Should consider. Now, I could tell you, we have been considering that, but we consider it against the background of our specific local and current circumstance. We are not Germany. We are not France vis-a-vis Algeria. We're not Germany vis-a-vis Turkey. We're not the United States vis-a-vis Mexico. We are not Canada vis-a-vis Central America. We are not England vis-a-vis Europe. We are Trinidad and Tobago, 1.3 million people in a small island nation, vis-a-vis 34 million Venezuelans and a large number of Colombians, right? So when we consider what we do here, we have to ask what effect is going to have on us and what is our consideration going to be. And we have done that to ensure that we don't cut our nose and spoil our face. So we are in the process of considering. And of course, a strategy for refugee emergencies must be developed and communicated to the main agencies, organizations involved in this field. We've done that. You know what we did? You know what the last government did? The strategy was to give UNHCR and Living Waters the right to register people in Trinidad and Tobago who come in as migrants and advise you. That will have to change. Because you see, the government is in a position now to do it itself. Because one of the things we had to do, one of the recommendations here, is to use evidence-based decision-making. And how did we get the evidence? We got the evidence by registering who was here with us. Open registration. Who came in legally? Who came in illegally? We went and we registered them all. There was a period of time, notice given, period of registration to be done, and at the end of the day, that Sunday night, except for Tobago where there were a few people to be registered, there was nobody in the line at the Oval. And let me stick a pin here, that while we were doing that, there were some nationals demonstrating against it, because not every person in Trinidad and Tobago agreed with that approach. But we, having considered our situation, we used the evidence of our registration to determine what our situation was. I have no doubt that there were a few people who didn't come to get registered, but we covered those too. We told them, if you do not come to be registered and accept this invitation to be a part of us, we will take it to mean that you do not want us to know that you are here, and when we find you, we will repatriate you. And if you come after this registration period, we will treat, and you come illegally, we will repatriate you. That is as clear as day, and that remains. However, we keep saying that it is 16,500 that we registered. Other people who registered nobody, telling you it's 40,000, it's 60,000, it's 100,000, because it is in their interest to bump that number up, because it works politically against Venezuela, and it works politically against the government of Trinidad and Tobago, right? But they need that because they don't want to end up like the WHO and like UNESCO. So they go down that road. But among the recommendations, it talks about an overstayers report to be generated periodically. We're getting there. We're working on that, right? And of course, the immigration division. Listen to this phrase. Ideally, the immigration division should be a repository for information which could be utilized to guide and inform migration strategies and policies. We accept that, and we're doing that. Our colleagues on the other side of the floor, how many times have they sued the immigration officer? Numberless times. Chief immigration officer in the courthouse having to go to answer question for doing what the recommendation says we must do and for doing what the government is doing. Of course, the recommendations talk specifically about equipment and resources, and this is key because I want to come back to it. It talks about assessing your equipment and resources to be able to hold the line against those who will come to you as undesirables in one way or the other. It talks about priority equipment needs and resource deficiencies. And it talks to the country about capacity to respond to challenges posed by irregular migration, smuggling of migrants, and trafficking of persons. We saw that very early in the game. And what did we do? We sought to put a capacity in place where the capacity didn't exist. Because in 2013, that recommendation was acted upon by the government of the day. And you know how they acted upon it? They canceled the OPVs, take back the money, they got sold back to Brazil, and we were left early in our term to go and look for the equipment and resources that we were deficient in. And of course, that is what took us to Australia, to get the money from the Australians, to buy the 2 vessels that are on their way and would have been here already had it not been for COVID-19. Those vessels would have been here because we are going down these recommendations. And of course, having done that between 2013 and 2015, this report existed there. Just before the election of 2015, we woke up one morning and an attempt was made to deal with this. We bought 12 boats from Daman. And of course, last week you would have heard the Attorney General saying that action is now the subject of a criminal investigation by the Dutch government, where somebody was paid over $200 million in commission on the sale, but we paid for the boats. The commission was paid in full up front, 23% of the contract. And what attracted the Dutch government's attention was a normal commission at maximum would be 4%. But in Trinidad and Tobago, on this purchase, just before the 2015 election, was a 23% payment of $200 million. And that was raised in the parliament only last week. And of course, one of the big issues that took us into the general election was the whole question of the government of Trinidad and Tobago talking to the government of Venezuela. We told you in the media and the country, we had a request from the government of Venezuela to talk to us. We agreed at the time the border was closed for COVID management, but our neighbor next door could make her way here, the vice president of Venezuela, who was given the authority under the presidency of Venezuela to be the point person dealing with these matters and COVID, asked to see me, and I agreed. You know what the recommendation said here? Page 65 under partnership in 2013. It says, bilateral dialogue and agreements with major source countries. Of course, Venezuela is our major source of the migrants. Major source countries of undocumented migrant workers, smuggled migrants, and trafficked persons should be encouraged. And this is to assess the increased opportunities for labor migration arrangements and sensitize potential migrants to the dangers of clandestine entry and work. That is the recommendation of the ACP on Trinidad and Tobago in 2013. But when I talked to Delcy Rodriguez, it's a big political bacchanal in Trinidad and Tobago, and you people in the media willing and able, running behind it, wele. And the question you have to ask yourself is, who needs medical and mental attention here? Because this, I'm guarantee you that most people in the government of the day never read this document. And certainly the government never acted upon these recommendations. And to the extent that they did act on any, they act counterintuitively. Sell out the OPV, shut down the thing, make a big fuss about talking to Venezuela, and take a big bribe on the purchase of the diamond vessels. Those are the three things they did. And of course, we talk here about a whole series of recommendations. And I trust that you would go to your websites and find this document and read it. And you would be able to see how we in Trinidad and Tobago have diligently approached this issue, allowing a certain amount of people to come in claiming they have difficulties, but all along making a clear distinction between a person who can seek and get asylum and one who is singly coming for economic circumstances or an economic migrant. And if there is any nation that should understand this, is Trinidad and Tobago, because we are 10% of our country is in America. There's hardly a family in this country that doesn't have a migrant member somewhere outside of this country. But what we have also done is what no other country has done in this Venezuelan situation. We opened our border. And when we thought, as the report says, look at your capacity to manage, when we thought our capacity was being exceeded, we registered and we stopped free movement in and out. And we also created an opening for legal migration. We, for the first time in over 300 years, Venezuelans are put on a visa. And that allowed the country now, if you want to come to Trinidad, you have to come to a legal port, having made an application, and the country's authorities will determine your application, just as we do with other people's countries. And if you are here, even the registered person who is here, if you came in illegally and you are registered, and you have a wife or a child in Venezuela, and you want them to come here, what is available to you is to apply for a visa for the child. The Minister of National Security will look at it, and we will determine whether or not a visa is granted. Same thing happened to us at the U.S. Embassy on Marley Street. But you will also remember, Some people didn't like our election results after the NAR lose the election in Trinidad, this sweet, sweet Trinidad. And you remember what they did? They left here on their own volition, angry over their politics, and they went to Canada, where we could have gone with no visa back and forth. Up to that point, Canada, we could have gone, get a ticket and go to Canada and come back when you wish. Migrants left here and they went to Canada, our citizens, shocking us, telling the Canadian authorities on lawyers' instruction that they were, because they were of a certain race and because they were of a certain politics, they were being raped, and when they report to the police wouldn't come to their assistance, so therefore they want asylum in Canada. Of course, Canada has a High Commission in Trinidad and Tobago who continuously will report the truth to the Canadian authorities. And what did they do? Put us on visa for the first time. So we need a visa to go to Canada now because some of our own nationals went there. And we got to, we're not easy, One fella, he didn't even go up as a migrant with that lie. He went to Piarco, climb over the fence, run across between the security, and go up in the wheel well of the plane, and got himself flown into Canada. Twice. Picture that. Twice he did that. Because Trinidad is not a real place, and life's so hard here. He go up there, that plane will come up in there, 51 degrees below zero, freezing up there. He got to Canada. They deported him, and he does it again. So we are dealing with this issue. We have done all that we could, but if you look in the conversation, you won't see in the conversation that 16,000 Venezuelans are in Trinidad and Tobago allowed to participate and do the best they can here amongst us. Find a job. There's one hospital where I'm being told that most of their patients, especially pregnant women, are Venezuelans. They get basic health care. They get security like all of us. I see a demand being made to me to pay the rent for people who can't pay the rent, migrants, or to let landlords not evict them if they can't pay the rent. That is not even available to nationals of Trinidad and Tobago from my office. But I'm being required to do that for migrants. And we have done the extension, and we will do it again. Those who are here and they have an extension which ends in January, what I'll take to the cabinet is that they be allowed to remain for another 6 months. During that 6-month period, there would be changes in the legislation, but it might not be what others are asking for, which is to have an open-door policy on refugees for economic migrants to come to us in large numbers. The most you can see in that change is new and firmer laws for persons who encourage the illegal trade, and stiffer penalties for human trafficking. Because you see, this is not something, as I said earlier on, only known to us. And people don't move because there's a place to go. There are normally push factors and pull factors. The push factor in Venezuela are the conditions in Venezuela. Whoever fault it is my fault, your fault, his fault. Conditions in Venezuela cause people to be pushed. They want to go somewhere else. But one gentleman said here last week that something he knew about one of the migrants, and I hope it's not one who had perished, that his wife was working in a bakery. He's here as a registered migrant. His wife is working in a bakery over there, and she lost her job. So he was trying to get her to come here. Well, losing your job in a bakery does not warrant you having asylum. That is an economic migrant who is looking for a better life through economic improvement or change. And I dare say, if you are going to apply for asylum in Trinidad and Tobago or anywhere in the world, you have to prove that you are personally in danger and personally under attack for race, for religion, for politics, or whatever, but because of the interaction between you and the powers that be, whoever they are, that you are personally in danger. Your ambition for a better life through economic change is not grounds for asylum anywhere in the world. And we will have to be crazy to legislate a position giving rights to people that our citizens don't have, and giving rights to people for any number of them to come into our country, because no country can do that or ever does that. So I want to say to you, this has to be a national position. I speak to you as the Prime Minister of the country, and I really would expect that this politics of this for Trinidad and Tobago will stop at the border. But unfortunately, we have an opposition that uses the imprimatur of their office to make statements in Trinidad and Tobago, not realizing that they think they're attacking me personally, or my government, or my party. But what it is doing by making those kinds of statements and taking those kinds of positions, including supporting President Guido, is to give basis and strength and succor to a narrative in Venezuela about Trinidad and Tobago and its government. This lady and her friends, these are Venezuelan politicians in Venezuela. They had an election the last week or whenever, where who choose to take part in, didn't take part in and whatnot. But as we said in the beginning, we don't take part, get involved in other people's business. But if you read this line, it says that Luzardo, who I think is, no, Luzardo is the politician, this is his vote, accused the Maduro regime and the Trinidad and Tobago government of violating the right to life of Venezuelan migrants. So Venezuelans are being encouraged to leave Venezuela for their circumstances, being encouraged to come to Trinidad by persons here who believe that they're doing good. They're drowned in Venezuela. But a narrative could develop that it is the government of Trinidad and Tobago who is violating the right to life. I reject that out of hand, and those people in Trinidad and Tobago who are prepared to accept that, I would simply ask you to go and read the poem of Barbara Fritchie. Shoot if you must, this old gray head, but save your country's flag, she said. You see, when our leaders do not lead for the country but lead for themselves, they could take us anywhere. And we now have people here who know where the migrants are in the sea. They know when the migrants are turned back by the Coast Guard. They know when they're coming back. They know which beach they're going to land on. They know who to talk to once they put foot on Trinidad soil. They know which lawyer to talk to. And of course, they're running a huge social media platform in Venezuela and elsewhere in Trinidad and Tobago. This is a big story, big thing going on. And it is being sold in a particular way to suit certain people's politics and to suit certain people's pockets. So when the drowning takes place in Venezuela, and 6 people are arrested in Venezuela, and the government says that these are traffickers and mafia, and they are going to prosecute them. In my country, in Trinidad and Tobago, my media says, I am calling migrants traffickers. As if I and you and I don't have the ability to differentiate between traffickers and migrants. So I'm being scolded. How could you use the word traffickers to describe migrants? Well, I'm telling you, this report warned about trafficking. Between 2013 and now, there is a huge growth in the trade, the trafficking. And we know that the Minister of National Security and the Police Commissioner tell you that all the time. And of course, some of our own personnel in the security services are facilitators there. That's no secret to us. Some been charged for that. At the time when this report was written, human trafficking wasn't even a phrase commonly used here. Now, it is an integral part of our national security discussions. And I speak against the background of the principles of this country, taken at home and carried abroad. When we take leadership of CARICOM in the next few weeks, I become the chairman of CARICOM. And this matter will not go away. It will fall under my chairmanship. And Trinidad and Tobago's principled position, one that has been congratulated by those who have no ill agenda, where we have taken on a per square kilometer basis, on a per capita basis, more people into our country than from Venezuela than any other country. There's no other country that has taken more Venezuelans into their bosom. And we empathize with them, and we share what we have with them. So when it is being said that we are violating Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago, I expect that every patriotic Trinidadian and Tobagonian will reject that statement. But there are those who would not, because they believe that it would redound to the detriment of the government or the Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, these are matters that have been with us for all times. In fact, there are some people who don't even believe we deserve independence. And there are some people who fought against it and might still be fighting against it. But let me just quote, not my favorite writer. I didn't even think I will quote the writer. But it is so opportune and it is so apt that I must quote it. And it says this. It says, America is a sovereign nation, and our first priority is always the safety and security of our citizens, unquote. Donald J. Trump. Couldn't agree more. Trinidad and Tobago has that same position. We at CARICOM, in the height of the Venezuelan exposure to military intervention, CARICOM took a position opposing that, and Trinidad and Tobago was in the leadership of CARICOM on that. And we joined with Uruguay, Mexico, and there were other countries like Cuba and Nicaragua, South Africa, the OAU, and so on. We went to the United Nations in keeping with our support for multilateralism. You may recall in January, I, along with the Prime Minister of Barbados, we led our nations to the United Nations, to the Office of the Secretary General. And then I went on the floor and outlined Trinidad and Tobago's position to the world. That is how you run a country. And that is why you could talk to everybody with respect. They don't have to agree with you. And of course, what I don't share with you are the number of entreaties to me to do this or to do that. But I don't live in this job for myself. I do this job for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And like that statement I just made, our number one priority in this matter is the interest of the people and the safety of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. 16,000 Venezuelans here. There are a number of nationals here who think we have too many. I appeal to them. We must show that brotherly love, that neighborliness. Migration works for us. It will work for those who come to us as migrants. And in keeping with the ethical behavior of countries that are worthy of the name, we will treat with Venezuelans who are within our border, but we expect them to respect our laws and our borders. As we move into the next phase that I've just mentioned will be extended, we will require these registered Venezuelans to re-register. We have a visa system operating, and as they update their registration, we in Trinidad and Tobago, the relevant authorities, will determine what status we give them. And of course, there are many who can contribute to our development. And maybe one day a person of Venezuelan vintage, parentage, could speak to these days as the days when his or her parent came here, before he or she became a born Trinidadian or Tobagonian. That's how the world goes. And we are there with that. But what we will not do is to sell our country short. We are happy that we don't have to try to build politics from the opposition of this. This is a series, 7 pages, I got from the Attorney General this morning, confirming what we have done with respect to this report and its recommendations. And we will continue to be guided by it. And you know, there's one part in the report which I must mention to you, because it talks about it uses a phrase that is not, it talks about, here, common sense. It talks about common sense. And it goes on to talk about the country's migration context, including its small size, absorptive capacity, resources, and decreased migration in the wake of economic crisis. A common sense approach is therefore needed. That is a recommendation in 2013, which is still valid today. And that common sense approach is needed, and the various migration-related initiatives should be communicated to the public. I do that all the time. To dispel intolerant attitudes, we encourage our members, our nationals, not to be intolerant, even though there were those who were demonstrating, why are you registering people, right? And reassure the citizenry of the government's control of the situation. We are in control of this situation as leaders of a sovereign nation. This piece of work is very, very valuable, and it allowed us to form a sensible basis going forward in treating with this thorny and prickly matter. And the international media is being used by some people to carry false narratives, as you would have seen with the drowning in Venezuela. And unfortunately, that would have come from, and similar kind of misrepresentation, from public servants at the OAS. So if I take issue with them, I'm simply doing my job. And those who ask about Trinidad and Tobago's membership in the OAS is not in danger. We are a member. We are not a sheep. We are a member, and our record can stand scrutiny anywhere, anytime, in the face of people who are reasonable. And I tell you, you may want to ask, why is it that Trinidad and Tobago, this tiny little country who has done so much for its neighbors, why are we the ones being held up as being callous and being this? Don't they read the news in Europe? Have they asked about anything on the Mexican border? So, as we say in Tobago, we are low fence. Anybody could jump over. But sometimes this hibiscus grows. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Oh, Bashi, you have a question? Please. And from all that I've said, you could gather what our position is. Suppose we don't halt pushbacks at sea. You know what that means? It means the 34 million Venezuelans only have to get in a boat in Venezuela and head for Trinidad. And we will then be required to deal with all of them here when they arrive here. And when they arrive here and claiming the rights that they asked for, what is our position? Let me just, for one moment, ask you. You know what our position is right now in terms of 16,000 Venezuelans. Some say it's 30,000. The same UNHCR says 100,000. Suppose we really have into Trinidad and Tobago 200,000 or 300,000 migrants. What is our position? And of course, I keep asking you all and asking them, when last have you looked at the map of South America? It's a continent. And there's a tiny little island you'd see in the mouth of the Orinoco. It's a nation called Trinidad and Tobago. On a per capita basis, we have taken more Venezuelans into this country on a per acre basis than anybody else in the world. That same UNHCR comment, you've never seen that. You've never seen that mentioned, and you will not see it, because it does not suit the narrative and the agenda.
Given that, well, we have registered about 16,000, Minister Young, just over, right? But according
that number is 16,570, and that is data-driven. Come and get registered, and you all sat there and watched it in full public view.
We saw that the UN published a document saying that there are just about over 19,000 asylum seekers. Now, are we to assume
Where?
In Trinidad? So our figure, but they're referring to.
What I will ask you is, where is that data coming from? Because the minister, as far as I know, I have a minister of national security. He has asked the UNHCR to tell us how many persons they have registered in Trinidad and Tobago. How many have registered? I think the figure they mentioned was about 12,000. How many have you processed to go on to another country that may have more ability to take any? That is the question you all should ask. Because if you're inviting all these people into our country to be registered, how many have you processed to allow them to go on to a better place or a different place where the ability of that country would be better than Trinidad and Tobago's? You're not asking those questions. Those questions are the government's questions to ask and answer.
Well, Mr. Prime Minister, I was about to ask now, there was a document that they published, and their figure for persons who are seeking to be registered as refugees is 19,000. That's above our figure, right?
And I'm asking you, where did that data come from? We conducted an open registration here, and you know how it went. You were part of reporting it before it happened. You covered it while it was happening, and you covered it when it ended. We have a number, data extracted number. We know where our number comes from. If there is somebody else with different data, the least I could ask you is tell me, what is the source of that data?
But Mr. Prime Minister, if we are to assume that those coming here and even registered with us would have also registered with the United Nations, and if we were to also assume that they want to be resettled elsewhere, their main aim is not to be here, what really should the United Nations do?
I can't speak for the United Nations in that, but I tell you what the UNHCR, what their job should be, and it is supposed to be, which is to assist refugees where they are to go, where they would like to go. And in Trinidad and Tobago, if a certain amount of people pass through here to go somewhere, then the least you can ask of us is to allow them to pass. It's happening in Europe all the time. People are leaving Eastern Europe and passing through. They want to get to Germany, they want to get to the UK, but we don't have that situation here. And it is not for me to determine what that is. What is for me is to determine that a situation doesn't develop where Trinidad and Tobago becomes a refugee camp. And I've said so at the very beginning. But some people don't like that. And as I told you earlier on, an asylum seeker and an economic migrant is not the same. If they use the words interchangeably, you're going to end up in that situation that you are raising there. Person seeking asylum. You can't seek asylum because somebody lost a job in a bakery. Asylum is that you are facing imminent, dire personal persecution for your religion, for your race, for some political position you might have taken, something that picks you out for bad treatment by somebody who knows you personally. That's when you seek asylum. So let us not, and I implore you in the media, let us stop using these words so loosely, because you are in fact feeding other people's agenda.
I have a question, Prime Minister. The incident with the boat, the tragedy with the boat coming in, Has there ever been like statements from Guardia Nacional or Venezuelan media, say interviewing survivors or relatives of the...
I couldn't speak to that. That's a matter internal to Venezuela, so I can't speak to that. I can speak about the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, which made a categorical statement, which I have to accept, that our Coast Guard didn't know anything about it, didn't interact with it, and those people didn't come here. So it was quite wrong, and it is a lie for it to be said that they came here, they were turned away, and when they returned to Venezuela, they drowned on the beach in Venezuela. And some people tell that story. Unfortunately, some people here in Trinidad and Tobago tell that story because it fits the narrative.
Anything, can we get the dates of the extension for the Venezuelan migrant card? And then you said there'd be a process.
The current cards expire in January 31st. 31st of December. So come January, in New Year's Day, we are the minister, before that time, the minister will announce the appropriate extension. And during that period, we will ramp up what we are doing with them. They will re-register. And during that time, we will then sort out in a way. And it will move all the way, because one of the things that we can't expect and which we won't do is mass deportation, right? We'll go through, and if you are people staying here and encouraging illegals to come here, then you're the head of the line to go back home. On the other hand, if you have been settled here and you are deemed to be a contributor and you are not involved in illicit activities and so on, especially if you have skills, then we, like other countries, will look at that in a certain way. And a visa system allows you to give people entry that is time sensitive. So they don't want us to do that because it doesn't suit some people's narrative. If the demonstration in front of our embassy in Trinidad, in Venezuela, is because they couldn't get their visas processed, that you could see that. But if it is to tell me that we are violating the civil rights of Venezuelans, then you're off track.
Prime Minister, I was looking at one of the comments on, I think it was, I can't remember if it was at your personal account or so. There was a lot of people commenting very negatively towards Venezuelan nationals who are here in all sorts of ways, like housing, vacant housing, jobs, so on. Did you have any comment on it? Because in your speech now,
My comment on that is that the people of Trinidad and Tobago, by and large, have been very welcoming and accommodating to a number of Venezuelan migrants who are seeking to make their way in Trinidad and Tobago. But of course, as in any country, there are those who believe that this is not the best thing for them to do. And of course, when they behave unreasonably, you get these negative comments about going back home and so on. But by and large, we are a caring country, and we are proud of what we have been able to do for those Venezuelans who have left home and have come to our country. And we empathize with them, and we assist them so far as we are able to. And they live here, 16,000 plus of them. Right? And as we go forward, we'll keep treating with them in the most humane and comforting way.
Mr. Prime Minister, in Justice Frank Sipasad's ruling, as it related to one of the migrants that came before him, in reflecting on Trinidad and Tobago's migration policy, he did say that whereas there may be a policy, it was not legislated. There was no...
I don't know what that means. If it's not legislated, then our immigration officers can't work. You see, you may not like what is there now, but that is the law. You may want to change to something else that suits, but the government has to look at the broader picture, and it is the government that will decide what we legislate. And this document, right, if you go through it with some time, you would see, as you go to legislate, you have to be careful what you are legislating, which is why they ask us to consider doing certain things. But if you consider doing certain things and do it to your detriment, then who are you going to blame?
So when you take over CARICOM next year, is there any way to use that strengthened position to lobby against the OAS Secretary General as it stands with Venezuela?
Why would I want to do that? So that you can say that he and I fighting? I have made my position very clear in 2017, speaking as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, standing alone, that the head of the OAS has no right engaging in derogatory conversation with the head of any government anywhere in the region. Because today is Venezuela, tomorrow is Trinidad and Tobago, and you see it. You see it. So that is not what the OAS is about. And we have to stand on principle. That will take us through every day of the week. Those who did a certain thing. Look at our friends in the opposition. They spent all the time supporting MP Guido as president of Venezuela because it was said that that was a route to get a new president and because he was head of the assembly. And they denigrated us, they undermined our foreign policy. And okay, this last election in Venezuela, good election, bad election, what it is, I don't know, because I've been listening all the time to the one in Washington. But the bottom line is, he didn't take part in the last election. That is not unknown to us here in Trinidad and Tobago. The DLP didn't take part in an election. Election took place, PNM won all 36 seats. In Jamaica, the JLP didn't take part in an election. The PNP didn't take part in an election. JLP won all the seats, government proceed. In Venezuela, he didn't take part in the election for reasons known to them and for maybe good reason, but the bottom line is he didn't take part. And therefore, I don't think he's now part of the assembly. What is the UNC's position now on President Guido? Is the UNC going to go and pick another president in Venezuela or follow somebody else and pick a president for Venezuela? And in our own jurisprudence, in our own jurisdiction, our Supreme Court, highest court is in London. It just ruled a few weeks ago on a matter with Venezuela and the seizure of Venezuelan gold by those who felt that Venezuela government should not have access to its gold. England did the unthinkable. The Bank of England seized Venezuelan gold. The British Supreme Court ruled that Mr. Guaido is not the president of Venezuela and that Maduro is the president of Venezuela. A ruling from our court, our own court, our highest court ruled that. Yet I have the opposition here telling me that I am supporting Maduro by recognizing the government of Venezuela. That's what they're encouraging me to do. You have to ask yourself a question. Had I not been the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and the opposition leader was the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, what exactly would they have been doing in these situations? What would they have been doing? Leading us down that road because somebody else's sovereignty is superior to ours, and you follow what they say to you. I love this country. Small in size, but not insignificant.
So what is our official position with the OAS? We remain members with the OAS.
That was never in doubt. It was never in question.
What is our official position? Are we withholding? Are we going to meetings? Are we voting?
We go to the meetings, but we're not voting on any resolution, supporting any resolution where the people who are sitting there representing countries are not proper. You ever been in a credit union? You ever joined an all-force club? Well, okay, you know that. You know how it goes.
Mr. Prime Minister, if we were to refer to the shipwreck in particular, we've read two accounts in media that persons on the shipwreck were believed to be two persons who are registered in Trinidad and Tobago. We've also heard Minister Young saying that people have been riding the seas to go country to country with their registration cards as though,
Well, I think I will leave you to be educated on that by Minister Young talking about what we know. What we do know is that there are people in Venezuela organizing people to go to Trinidad. And many of those persons are doing so for profit, and they are called traffickers. And we do know that there are people in Trinidad integrated with that, receiving them and protecting them and assisting them in Trinidad. And the laws that we are going to upgrade will make it less attractive for our citizens in Trinidad and Tobago to do that. Because this is a matter which has grown in size and stature and complexity, and we just have to evolve with it.
Final question. We saw that there were protests outside the Trinidad and Tobago embassy in Venezuela as the attaché arrived. He was bombarded by protesters. How do you respond to persons such as that?
I just did. I told you the protester is saying that we, alongside the president of Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, is violating the what is it called? We're violating the life, the right to life of Venezuelans. Now that is ridiculous. A drowning in Venezuela by people who attempt to leave Venezuela has nothing to do with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and I wouldn't go there. Right? But of course, there are those who will try to turn it on its head. So I can't go any further than that. It's an unfortunate development. It is something that we hope will never happen again. And we are saying to people, especially those people here in Trinidad, who we have within our border, don't encourage people in Venezuela to do that. There's a legal channel that is open. They may be successful going through asking for a visa. A visa may be granted for a period of time, or it may not be granted. You know that. But don't risk your life trying to come in illegally in the dead of night in an open boat, unsafe, and risk your life doing it. Don't encourage people to do that. And if you're a Venezuelan here and you're doing that, don't encourage your family to do that, because you may lose your family members, as has happened there in that drowning. That's all we can say. And of course, you are breaking the law. Our border is closed. The Venezuelan border is closed. So anybody here who is phoning anybody in Venezuela and telling them to come and when to come and where to pass, you are in fact acting as a criminal. You are breaking the law. And you are risking people's lives. And then when they get killed, you have the temerity to turn around and blame the government of Trinidad and Tobago. For 300 years, we have had Venezuelans coming and going here. And if in this 21st century, we have a problem like that and Venezuelan families are here and they want to come and go in a way that is managed by Trinidad and Tobago, let us manage it in the context of our sovereignty. There are people who want to say to us that we have no sovereignty, just do as I say. And that is where we part company. Thank you all very much.